God's knowledge of the world is an efficient cause of his existence. God already knew. God's knowledge of the world is its cause of existence. His knowledge of the world and whatever is in it is huzuri. God already knows of it. It's already present. It didn't come into existence in God's knowledge. God already knew about it. It's already present within God. So God's prior knowledge, or what's called ilmul huzuri, according to Shah Waliullah, is his knowledge of himself, right? Pre-eternal knowledge. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be continuing with the epistemology of Shah Waliullah Dehlavi. We're going to be looking at the definition of ilm, definition of knowledge. It's worth bearing in mind right at the outset that knowledge is a simple reality which doesn't have a genus or differentiation. So in other words, knowledge isn't something that you can grasp. It isn't something that you can physically touch, okay? And it's difficult to define it in a common way. So, we can define a phone, right? We can talk about its size, we can talk about its dimensions, we can talk about how heavy it is, we can talk about its color. But with knowledge, we don't have the same sort of tools at hand to be able to define what knowledge is. And it's a stage or a kind of existence. So it's very difficult to give it a definition. I mean, an iPhone, to return back to my phone, is pretty much the same all the time in terms of its color, size, dimensions. But knowledge is alternating, it's changing. So that makes it even more slippery to sort of define. And there's also the added complication between knowledge and being. So knowledge and being is knowledge of something and the existence of it, what we call ontology, which I will talk about in one separate video. So the knowledge of this bottle here of perfume is me knowing about it and knowing its existence, or it existing itself, being. So I might not know about this, but it might exist anyway, right? So this bottle of perfume has existence whether I know about it or not. It's separate from me. But when I come to know it, I have knowledge of it. So it has separate existence, which is called ontological existence or being. But when I come to know of it in my mind, that's ilm of it, what's called epistemology. So Shah Waliullah is in agreement with another great sage, Mullah Sadra, who says that knowledge and being are often interchangeable. In other words, they're one of the same thing. However, given this difficulty, Shah Waliullah does try to provide a description to the term knowledge, and he does this in a text of his called Al-Budurul Bazigha. And he says essentially that knowledge is a realization of the form of the object by the subject, the knower, with full consciousness. In other words, knowledge is when I come to know of this. Now what you see here is two things. One is me coming to know of it. That's the subject. I'm the subject coming to know about this. And then there's the object itself. So, oh, this is a perfume bottle. So there's two things that's happening here. There's subject and object. There's two separate things that exist, what's called ontological existence, two separate beings. But there's also a second thing which is going on, which is my knowledge of it. I'm becoming aware of it. There's two separate existences here. So what we're talking about is two things here. One is knowledge, ilm, epistemological knowledge of something, and one is the two things existing separately in of themselves. So this is a kind of way of knowing about something, and this is usually how we acquire knowledge. This is like ilm al-husuli, because you know about something because it exists outside of you. You come to see it with your eyes, or you come to smell it, or you come to see it, taste it, or something else, and you then acquire knowledge of it. So, and there's an ontological existence, there's a separation between you as a subject and the object of what you come to know. But this definition of knowledge, as you can see immediately, is only applicable when you're talking about things that are formative or empirical, things that exist, right? Things that exist out there. And they're two separate things. Then you can see it happening. And you're like, okay, I can see subject and an object, if you like. And when you think about ilm al-huzuri, which is something that we talked about in a previous video, where something just comes to you, right? It just comes into your heart, impresses itself on you. You don't see that thing, right? So there's no two subject and object. It's just, it comes to you. So you can see there's no division here. Okay, that's what's about ilmul huduri. So when you think about God's knowledge, so in the case of God's knowledge, this definition wouldn't work, because if you say that God knows something outside of him, then you're separating God from existence. Can you see? That's a problem. Right? You're separating God from existence, because God is the source of all existence. So how do you square that particular circle? Let me just take a step back, and before we talk about God and how we can make sense of this, when I say, for example, I'm Haroon, so I am the subject and I'm the object. Can you see? Whereas if I say this is a perfume bottle, you can clearly see subject and object. But when I say Haroon, and I become self-aware, or I say me, or I say I, or I say ana in Arabic, you can't use the definition that we talked about before about subject and object, knowledge of the object, because you cannot be impressed by your own form, but you're still in full awareness of your own reality. Like, I know that I exist. I know that I exist. I am the subject, knowing that I exist, and I'm also the object, knowing that I exist as well. And this is very similar to how people require or acquire knowledge when it comes to intuition or mystical knowledge, because again, that particular definition of knowledge that we gave about subject and object doesn't apply here, because people acquire it. It just comes into their heart. And so, for example, the Gnostic, the Arif Billah, for example, has intuition. And he doesn't apprehend or see any formal object. There's no object that he sees in front of him, right? And he's not only unaware of the known object or idea, but he's also not sure about the very meaning or perceptive faculty of that intuitive knowledge. So he sometimes doesn't even know where it comes from, but he's got knowledge of something. He hasn't seen it, but he has got knowledge of something. Especially when it comes to things like future events, because you can't really physically see, you can't grab physical events like this, but you have knowledge of it. Can you see? So there is another type of knowledge which is not subject to the object subject division, if you like. And the ulama, the scholars, say that this all depends on a degree of purification and the perfection of the person in question. So this is why the difference found between intuitions of different persons is directed towards the differences of their inner states, of the purification of the environment, and towards the intuitions itself. So people do acquire this knowledge, and there is no subject object definition, because it's just placed within them. Having said that, my friends, we can get a sense of God's knowledge of the world. So God's knowledge of the world, God and knowledge of the world, where the very existence of the world is there because of God's knowledge of it. So there's no distinction between God and the world. Just like there's Haroon and the existence of Haroon. I know that I exist. Even though there's no subject-object division, when it comes to God, God's knowledge of the world the world comes into existence because God's knowledge of it. In other words, God's knowledge of the world is an efficient cause of his existence. God already knew. God's knowledge of the world is its cause of existence. His knowledge of the world and whatever is in it is huzuri. God already knows of it. It's already present. It didn't come into existence in God's knowledge. God already knew about it. It's already present within God. So God's prior knowledge, or what's called ilmul huduri, according to Shah Waliullah, is his knowledge of himself, right? Pre-eternal knowledge. And this knowledge that God has of himself embodies the knowledge of all his attributes and all of his creatures, not only from the point of view of unity, but also from the point of view of what's called otherness, ghayriyya, because his essential attributes, for example, ilm, are inseparable manifestations of his essence. So something doesn't come into existence outside of God. God already knows about it. It exists in God's ilmul azali. So thus all of his creatures stand as necessities in his being in this particular context I'm talking about. Consequently, what I've just said right now, definition of knowledge that we talked about before about subject-object, when I talk about a subject-object distinction, of course cannot apply to knowledge of God's knowledge of the world. God already knew. It's not like God knows about something after he created it, right? Because that would create a distinction. It's not like God knew about this iPhone after he created, I know about the iPhone once it comes in existence. God already knew about it because there's no distinction. It's already present within God. right? And God's knowledge is pre-eternal. I hope that makes it clear, that distinction is clear between God's knowledge and human everyday knowledge. Inshallah, in the next video, we'll be talking about some of the divisions of knowledge. And I hope that this short video explains that when we talk about God's knowledge, we have to be very careful that we're talking about two different things when it comes to human knowledge and God's knowledge. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يسمع مني شكواي